Diplomatic chess is being played at the highest levels.
Russia, we'll start off with Russia, and we'll announce a location. I think the location will be a very popular one for a lot of reasons, but we'll be announcing that a little bit later. I just don't want to do it now because of the importance of what we just did.
I completely understand.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Follow-up. Are you surprised that Zelensky hasn't figured out by now, in years of war, how to deal with you and to deal with Putin without needing permission to make concessions from his parliament or from a national referendum?
Well, he's going out and getting what he needs. You know, he's not authorized to do certain things. I said, well, you're going to have to get it fast because, you know, we're getting very close to a deal. And he's doing that, and he's working with the European nations, and they're terrific people, terrific leaders, NATO. And as you know, I became very friendly with them. They agreed to go from 2% to 5%, 2% that they didn't pay to 5% that they've already paid.
The stakes couldn't be higher as thousands of lives hang in the balance every single week. Russia has lost 25,000 soldiers in just the past month and a half, while Ukraine faces similar devastating losses. And Ukraine is fighting for its very survival at the negotiating table.
President Donald Trump at the White House just moments ago saying that he will soon announce details of a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We're going to be announcing later on, we're going to have a meeting with Russia. We'll start off with Russia, and we'll announce a location. I think the location will be a very popular one for a lot of reasons.
Now, those comments come the same exact day that Trump's self-imposed deadline was set to expire. He had told President Putin to come to the table to end the war in Ukraine, prepare to face punishing sanctions. We start things off with CNN's Kristen Holmes from the North Lawn in the White House. Kristen, we are standing by for more details on this meeting that is supposed to be announced later today. But the president had a lot to say about the dynamics at that event. What else did he say?
President Donald Trump has announced he will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday, August 15, 2025 in Alaska to discuss ending the war that has raged for over 3.5 years. But here's the shocking part. While Trump remains open to a trilateral summit with both leaders, the White House is currently focusing on planning the bilateral meeting requested by Putin. Ukraine's president is scrambling to secure his place at this critical moment that could determine his nation's future.
Putin next Friday in Alaska. That's according to a senior U.S. official and 3 people briefed on the internal discussions. It will be Trump and Putin's first meeting since Trump retook office and Putin's first visit to U.S. soil since 2015. And the stakes could not be higher for everyone involved. The New York Times reports, quote, Russia has shown no signs of pulling back in its war against Ukraine. Instead, it has intensified its long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities and attacks across the front line. Remember, Trump promised to end Russia's war in Ukraine on his very first day in office. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
Well, this morning, Zelensky flatly rejected that idea.
The White House is now considering whether to include President Zelensky in what could be the most consequential diplomatic meeting of this decade. So what's really happening behind the scenes? And why is Europe rallying around Zelensky like never before? To understand the stakes, we need to look at how we got here.
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, you know, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow.
I wanted to ask you, have you spoken to Russian President Putin yet? And would you go to Russia or Ukraine? And what exactly would you say to him?
We'll be announcing a location in maybe a little while. And I think you'll be very happy. We'll see what happens, right?
The complexity of this conflict runs deep. Territory has been fought over for years with massive casualties on both sides. Trump, who once said he could end the Russia-Ukraine war within his first 24 hours in office, has expressed increasing frustration with Putin, giving him a 50-day ultimatum to stop the fighting, then moving it up to 10 days. "I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made," Trump said, adding, "He talks, we have such nice conversations, such respectful and nice conversations, and then people die the following night with a missile going into a town and hitting." The timing of this summit is no coincidence. Friday's announcement came on the same day as a deadline that Trump had imposed on Russia to reach a ceasefire passed without any new agreement, as Trump had grown increasingly frustrated with Russia over the country's continued attacks on Ukraine. Trump's posture has shifted as Russia escalated its strikes against Ukraine, with Trump threatening tougher sanctions against Moscow, saying this week that he would apply steep tariffs on India, a key buyer of Russian oil. But what's most alarming for Ukraine is Trump's talk of territorial concessions. "We're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping," Trump said, adding, "There will be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both." This language has sent shockwaves through Kyiv and European capitals.
24 hours, they don't think that. Remember, this is swapping Ukrainian territory for Ukrainian territory, not Russian territory. And that the president so flippantly said, this is what we're going to talk about without the Ukrainians in the room, I just think is undermining his own ability to mediate an end to this horrific war. And I always say I applaud his efforts to be engaged and to try to end this war. But the strategy that he's adopted so far, I don't think advances the objective of ending the war. And contrary, if he walks out of a press conference and says, "I've just agreed to give away this and that piece of Ukraine to Putin," that will set back the peace process, not advance it.
And also his lack of adherence to timelines, right?
The former U.S. ambassador to Russia has made it clear that this isn't about swapping Russian territory for Ukrainian territory. It's about Ukraine potentially losing even more of its sovereign land. The math doesn't add up for Ukraine. Ukraine controls only around 4 square miles of Russian land in the western Kursk region, while Russia controls around a fifth of Ukraine's sovereign territory. The Ukrainian response has been swift and defiant.
Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Solutions that are against us, solutions that are without Ukraine, are simultaneously solutions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions.
President Zelensky has made his position crystal clear. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky quashed the idea of any territory formally changing hands, saying in a video address after Trump's announcement that Ukraine is also ready to work together with President Trump, but vowed his people will not give their land to the occupier. Zelensky said defiantly on Saturday that Ukrainians will not give their land to occupiers, as Zelensky and his European allies have said that ceding territory would only encourage Russian aggression. This is where the European factor becomes crucial. Zelensky isn't fighting this battle alone. Administration officials were working on Saturday to try to gain support for a potential ceasefire from the Ukrainian government and European leaders, with European leaders welcoming the Trump-Putin meeting, but emphasizing the need to keep pressure on Russia and protect the security interests of Ukraine and Europe as a whole. "We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force," the statement said. The European Union's foreign policy chief has been particularly vocal about Ukraine's inclusion. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas stated that any deal between the US and Russia must have Ukraine and the EU included, for it is a matter of Ukraine's and the whole of Europe's security. This isn't just diplomatic courtesy, it's a recognition that Europe's security is fundamentally tied to Ukraine's fate. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has also weighed in with strong support for Ukrainian sovereignty. Rutte told U.S. network ABC News that Friday's summit will be about testing Putin, how serious he is on bringing this terrible war to an end, adding, "It will be, of course, about security guarantees, but also about the absolute need to acknowledge that Ukraine decides on its own future, that Ukraine has to be a sovereign nation, deciding on its own geopolitical future." But here's what makes this diplomatic chess game even more complex: Putin's strategic positioning. The plan, which Putin presented to Trump's foreign envoy Steve Witkoff in a meeting in Moscow on Wednesday, would require Ukraine to cede the eastern Donbass region, the majority of which is currently occupied by Russia, as well as Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014. Russia analysts said Putin is convinced he is winning the war and can achieve his goal of subjugating Ukraine, stripping it of its military and its capacity to defend itself and blocking it from joining NATO. The Kremlin has made it clear they're not interested in treating Ukraine as an equal partner. Putin has resisted any talk of a direct meeting with Zelensky, which would imply recognition of the Ukrainian leader as an equal, with Putin dismissing the idea of a meeting with Zelensky, saying, for this to happen, certain conditions must be created. This isn't just diplomatic protocol, it's a fundamental rejection of Ukraine's sovereignty. Meanwhile, the location of this summit has drawn significant criticism.
I don't. I think Mark's doing a great job. I would say that, except I hope I don't get him into trouble by saying it. I think Trump has made some mistakes already. Number one, in holding this meeting on American soil, legitimizing a pariah leader of a rogue state. Second, he's allowed Putin to get first mover advantage by putting his peace plan on the table first. You can already see from Trump's own statements, he thinks that Zelensky has to make constitutional modifications for Ukraine to cede territory. Now, Zelensky has flatly rejected that, but what Putin gets more than anything else is an opportunity one-on-one to try and get his magic working again with Trump, applying that KGB training, whether intentionally or unintentionally. He pushed Trump further than Trump wanted to be pushed, and you saw the reaction.
Former national security officials are warning that holding this meeting on American soil legitimizes Putin as a world leader, rather than treating him as the pariah he has become. Alaska, a place sold by Russia to the United States 158 years ago for $7.2 million, would be where Russian President Vladimir Putin tries to sell his land deal of the century, getting Kiev to hand over chunks of land he's not yet been able to occupy. The decision to hold a summit in Alaska has been criticized in part by some officials who are wary of welcoming Putin to the U.S. The only better place for Putin than Alaska would be if the summit were being held in Moscow. So the initial setup is a great victory for Putin. What's particularly concerning for Ukraine is the pattern we're seeing. For all the bluster, Trump has not put a single iota of pressure on Putin yet. Zero. Zip, a senior European official said after talk of a summit began. Another sanctions deadline of Friday has just whizzed past, almost unnoticed in the kerfuffle about Alaska and land deals. This suggests that despite Trump's tough rhetoric, Putin may be getting exactly what he wants: direct negotiations with the U.S. without meaningful Ukrainian participation. The European response has been remarkable in its unity and speed. On Saturday, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Finland, and the European Commission said that any diplomatic solution must protect the security interests of Ukraine and Europe. This represents a significant diplomatic pushback against any attempt to impose terms on Ukraine without its consent. NATO's position adds another layer of complexity. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said a future peace deal could not include legal recognition of Russian control over Ukrainian land, although it might include de facto recognition. He compared it to the situation after World War II, when the United States accepted that the Baltic states were de facto controlled by the Soviet Union, but did not legally recognize their annexation. The stakes couldn't be higher for Ukraine's future. The success of a ceasefire deal hinges on Trump's ability to convince Ukraine to agree to Putin's list of demands, which involves Kiev giving up large parts of its territory. But as Zelensky has made clear, any decisions taken without Ukraine will be stillborn and unworkable. What we're witnessing is a fundamental test of the post-World War II international order. Will territorial conquest be rewarded with diplomatic recognition? Will a smaller nation's sovereignty be sacrificed for great power convenience? The European Union and NATO have made their position clear. They stand with Ukraine's right to determine its own future. The timing of European support is crucial. It would be the first face-to-face meeting between Putin and an American leader since former President Joe Biden met with his Russian counterpart in Switzerland in June 2021 8 months before Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Europe has had 3 years to see what Russian victory would mean for continental security, and they're not willing to accept it. The Kremlin's presidential aide, Yuri Ushakov, confirmed the meeting in Alaska, adding that it seems quite logical for such an important summit to take place in Alaska, and revealed Russia has already invited Trump for a follow-up meeting in Russia. This suggests Putin sees the Alaska meeting as just the beginning of a broader reset in U.S.-Russia relations, potentially at Ukraine's expense. But Ukraine isn't giving up. Zelensky said on Sunday, "The end of the war must be fair, and I am grateful to everyone who stands with Ukraine and our people today." This gratitude reflects the unprecedented European support Ukraine is receiving as it fights for its place at the negotiating table. The European backing isn't just diplomatic. Its practical.eu foreign ministers will meet on Monday to discuss next steps, showing that European support for Ukraine is being translated into concrete action and coordination. What makes this moment so critical is that we're not just talking about the end of one war, we're talking about the precedent for how international conflicts will be resolved in the 21st century. Will aggression be rewarded? Will smaller nations have a voice in determining their own fate? The answer to these questions will be determined in large part by whether Ukraine succeeds in securing its place at the table with Trump and Putin. The irony is stark. While Trump and Putin prepare to meet in Alaska, territory that Russia once controlled but sold to America, they're discussing the potential transfer of Ukrainian territory that Russia has seized by force. The historical parallel isn't lost on observers who see this as a test of whether might makes right in modern international relations. As we watch this diplomatic drama unfold, one thing is clear. Ukraine's fight isn't just about territory. It's about the fundamental principle that nations should have the right to determine their own future. With European and NATO backing, Zelensky is making a stand not just for Ukraine, but for the international order itself. The Alaska summit may determine whether that principle survives or whether we're entering a new era where great powers carve up smaller nations without their consent. The world will be watching on August 15th to see whether Ukraine gets its seat at the table or whether its fate will be decided by others. Based on the unprecedented European support and NATO backing Zelensky has secured, one thing is certain: Ukraine won't go quietly into any agreement that sacrifices its sovereignty. The fight for Ukraine's place at the table is just beginning.